Alrighty, so let's continue moving on with pies. So we've talked about the basics of pie. We have looked at how to go ahead and make pie dough, and now we have to fill the pie. And so today we're going to talk about the different types of pie, and really it's the different types of pie fillings because the pie crust is pretty much the same. So then, what can you fill that pie crust with? A lot of the times we think of dessert pies. So when we think of using pie dough and pie crust, we think of dessert pies. And there's four categories for that. So there's four categories of traditional pie fillings. The first one is your fruit fillings. Then you have your cream fillings, you have custard, and then the last one is a chiffon filling. So before I kind of delve more into these, I want you guys just to think about, I think I'm going to give you like 15 seconds, okay? And I want you to think about all the different types of pie that you can come up with. So I'm going to set a little timer on my phone here. We're just going to do 15 seconds. And I want you to try and just list out, or maybe write down, whatever works for you, all the different types of pies that you know or that you've heard of. Ready? Go. All right, well, there goes my timer. So I was kind of jotting some down too. And so I got apple, blueberry, cherry, pecan, pumpkin, French silk, lemon meringue, key lime, and I'm sure I missed ton cherry. So many different types of pie fillings, and that's the beauty of the pie crust. Is the pie crust is so versatile that it can complement a lot of these flavors. So the first one we're going to talk about is fruit. You can see some examples there. So typically when you use fruit in a pie, you can already buy it pre-canned in the pie filling. And so that top picture there, that cherry picture, that looks kind of like pre-canned or canned pie filling. But a lot of times with softer fruits, you kind of simmer them and you kind of break the fruit into like a sauce and then you bake it in the pie. Otherwise, you might just cut up a whole fruit and then you bake it like that. So, like apple pie, you literally can just cut up thin slices of apples, typically toss it in some like cinnamon sugar, and then typically dot it with some butter, and then it's ready to go. Okay, because it bakes well. So, a couple of different variations. So, some examples: apple, blueberry, cherry. This one on the bottom here, you can see that's like a mixed berry. I can definitely see blueberries and strawberries and bananas in there. Maybe strawberry, pumpkin pie. So those are your fruit pies. Now, tomorrow we're really going to get more into the crust decoration, but typically with your fruit pies is where you're seeing two crusts. And so you're seeing a top crust. All right, so then we have cream pies, and cream pies really are honestly, they just kind of taste like a thicker pudding. And so typically they're made one of two ways. They're either made by using a cornstarch thickened pudding mixture to make a cream filling, or they're made a similar way that a custard pie is made, which is the next category. So, like I said, it really tastes just like a thick pudding. So some examples are like there's a chocolate cream pie, banana cream, lemon meringue, the base of that. And what else? There's even you can just stay simple with like a vanilla cream pie too. Okay, but there's lots of different ways you can add in flavorings to that. I really like that too. I like how cold it is. I like the pudding texture. So then we have custard pie. And a custard is really anything that is made with, it has a heavy emphasis on eggs. And at their liquid state, eggs are, at room temperature, eggs are going to be a liquid state. And when you start to apply heat to eggs, they go through a process called coagulation. And that's where they start to thicken. And that's how eggs can act as a thickener and as a binder, which we know that they do. So a custard is just made from milk, eggs, and sugar. And oftentimes when you're doing this, you have to temper those eggs. So you gradually introduce them in because the milk is already hot. It definitely can contain other ingredients, but as a base, a custard pie is really just that eggy flavor. However, a lot of the cream textured pies are made with a lot of eggs, and they're made so they are just like a custard. So eggs are really the key here to thicken the filling. So anytime you see those eggs incorporated in, then you know it's a custard based pie. So like I said, depending on the type of custard made and the flavoring, it can resemble a cream pie texture as well. Now, going back to cream pies and custard pies, um, cream pies typically are put in a baked shell. And so that's where you would blind bake that shell, and it would be completely cooked, and then you would put it in there. And then you're good to go. You might decorate the top. Custard pies kind of just depends on the custard filling. Sometimes custard you bake with the raw pie shell, and sometimes it calls for an already pre-baked one. So, for example, I was looking at a French silk pie that I thought I was going to use with my pie crust, and it says to use it says to blind bake it. However, I do make it like a custard that I have to temper some eggs. So honestly, it just really depends on your filling recipe and what it directs you to do. All right, so the last one is chiffon. Chiffon is just a really light pie filling. So it's really light and airy. Typically, it has gelatin and it then is folded in with meringue. And so that's beaten egg whites with sugar. You beat that for a really long time and that turns into meringue. It's very light, very fluffy. And then you typically fold it in like with a gelatin mixture. Some may also contain whipped cream. And so maybe instead of that meringue or instead of that gelatin, you're going to see whipped cream, but just really, really light and fluffy. Like think about angel food cake and how light and fluffy of a cake that is. That's comparable to what chiffon would be, just such a very light, airy flavor, very decadent. So this is a pie topping that's really popular is meringue. So meringue, we're going to talk about in a couple weeks, but meringue is a mixture of beaten egg whites and sugar. There's lots of different ways that you can make it and lots of different ways that you can incorporate into baking and pastry. But a very simple way is you make the meringue and you just place it in dollops on top of different pies, and then you lightly bake it to give it that golden brown hue that you can see there. And so it's cute because you can see like the little wisps and the little peaks. Okay, so that would just be that, for example, is like a lemon meringue pie. Key lime is often topped with it. Chocolate creams are sometimes topped with it. I find meringue is it's a unique flavor. I think people either love it or people hate it. And once you bake the meringue, you have to eat it right away because if you let it cool, it kind of gets all slimy and it starts to like fall off the pie. So it is definitely one that like you want to use right away. So, like I said, those are the dessert pies, and that's typically what we think of when we think of pies. But pie crust is so versatile, and it can be used in so many other different ways. And this is where a lot of your savory fillings come in. And sometimes, you know what, they're not the typical pie shape, and that's okay. When we talk about dessert pies, they're always in that slope-sided pan, but you can use pie crust in different ways. So here's a few other ways that you can use pie crust. So the first one is a quiche, and that's this picture right here. So a quiche is pretty much an open-faced pie. So it just has that bottom crust, as you can see, and it's a mixture of eggs, and then you can put in any add-ins. Great things for breakfast. That one looks like there's like some zucchini and some cheese and some herbs and spices in there. I've seen like spinach feta quiches, and so quiches use that pie dough as the pie crust. Then you have hand pies, and hand pies just look like this. Okay, they're really just you roll out the dough, you cut it in a circle, you place some filling, and then you seal these edges. You can see these edges are sealed, and these edges are sealed right there. And two examples of that is an empanada. So up here is an empanada. Okay, and that kind of comes from Argentina, very popular down in South America. Again, it can be sweet filled, it can be savory filled. Like you can see, this one here is meat. So I'm thinking ground beef here and some potatoes, excuse me, and it looks like a little pepper up there. And then this right here, this is a pasty. And so I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with pasties. I did not know what a pasty was until I married Matt and went to the UP for the first time with him. And so a pasty is, again, it's using the pie crust, but inside is this filling. What my mother-in-law does is ground beef and rutabagas and carrots and potatoes, and oh my gosh, they're so good. But again, it uses the base as pie crust too. Down here is pot pies. And so pot pies is, instead of, a sweet filling, they use the bottom crust, the top crust, and then you have your vegetable and your meat mixture in there, kind of all mixed in with the gravy. So another great way to use pie crust as well. And this one I think is so fun. I love Pop Tarts, you guys, and there are so many homemade Pop Tart recipes out there, and a lot of them use pie crust as the base for the Pop Tart. So as I'm kind of spreading this pie lab into next week. And so today I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of time to research maybe a pie filling recipe that you might like to make next week. So I'm just going to have you research a pie filling that sounds good to you, that you think you can tackle. And then I just want you to submit the link if you found it online. Or let's say you found it in a cookbook or it's a family recipe you want to make, just take a picture of that and submit it to Google Classroom. I'm being pretty flexible here. Really what I want with this lab is you're for sure going to make the dough homemade. The filling can be dessert, okay? Or it could be like a main dish pie, like we talked about. Just because you submit this recipe does not mean you have to make this recipe for next week, okay? But I kind of want to start laying some of the groundwork for you guys so that way you know what you can get in terms of ingredients, because a lot of us don't just have pie ingredients laying around. And also, if you need ingredients, this gives me a good amount of time to get it to you by next week as well. So reach out to me with any questions. And again, just because you submit this recipe does not mean that you have to use it. You can always change your mind, of course. All right, so tomorrow we will talk about pie crust decoration, which I think is so fun.